everybody. Welcome to the Deeper Dive podcast of Hopevale Church. This is where we take the message from the weekend and we keep the conversation going throughout the week. Paul Miller here, sitting in for Dan and Kathy Davis. My privilege to be hosting today's conversation with Brent Ferris, who kicked off our Vintage Christmas series yesterday. Brent, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be back.
Yeah, it was great to be back together. It was great to kick off Christmas, like Advent, the beginning of the season and everything else. And I thought your message yesterday was awesome and timely and direct and clear. And we'll get into that in just a moment. But I do want to kind of, my lead-in question is about you and Dana, right? I mean, for those that heard the message yesterday, you were pretty honest about an interruption that you guys are dealing with. And I don't know how many people come up to me after the service and talk about that they've experienced something similar or whatever. So my first question is, how are you guys doing? Just give us a little more on how you're grieving through everything.
Yeah. Grief is such an extraordinary thing. Yeah. It sucks, but it's so important. So like, to answer your question, we're doing okay. We're stepping into it together. We're being very honest with each other, and I'm honest, like, for her and I as a couple, as a teammates and partners in life. Yeah, we are experiencing a new level of intimacy in our understanding of each other and how each other thinks and works, and we're not being quiet. Yeah, and so because of that, I think we're doing okay. We're talking, we're being honest, and.
Well, yeah, you're talking from the stage to the whole church about how it's going, right? So.
Yeah, well, 3 weeks after, and so that was more Holy Spirit, less Brent. I did not want to. Sure. But was on my way up. I was in the back there. We're about to step on, and the guy's like, but you're gonna. And I'm like, okay. Wherever you go, that's where we're going. But
yeah, no, it was really strong for that reason. So I commend you for that. I mean, I remember... Thanks. We were in the conversations about, okay, you guys had just gone through this as a couple, as a family, and you're going to teach about Mary and the irony of all of that. Yeah. So well done. Just know that it ministered on so many levels, especially to all of the folks in our church family who have gone through a similar experience.
Yeah, that's interesting too. So many people have. Yeah. And that's actually shocking a little bit. I think the more normal we can get up and as pastors, as teachers, and say, no, we mean it when we say come as you are, and let's not be the social media version of yourself. Let's be honest and be real. Yeah. And I talked about that in the summer when I was like, no, we need to get after it and be, don't come in here with a mask on. Come in here and let's just pour it out as a community. And felt like Dan and I both felt like that was something that we needed to do, because life isn't always great, and sometimes it's very hard, and that doesn't mean you quit on the gospel, and doesn't mean God quits on you. Yeah.
Well, and it's real life. Yeah. I mean, the first point of your message, right? The whole idea that interruption can be an invitation. I should pause and say that I didn't have to go back and re-listen to the message to take my notes, because from memory, I could write down the things that you said, the idea of interruption being an invitation, the 3 practical steps of trusting the process, trusting the plan, and trusting the pilot. It was really helpful, and you gave us all really easy hooks to hang our thoughts on as we're facing our various types of interruption that we're all going to be dealing with. So I do have some questions, though, that I want to jump into with you, right? The first one is, I was glad that you walked us through the story, and that you didn't assume that we all knew how Mary got the word and what she did immediately afterwards, going to see Elizabeth and all of that. So my first question is, I'm struck by the fact that Mary gets this word, and it's clear, and it's direct, and she immediately packs up and decides to travel to see Elizabeth to verify or whatever. I don't know we don't know exactly what was going on in her head, but she's like, I got to go see for myself. Yeah. So is that like a sign of lack of trust, or what do you think's going on in Mary at that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's human.
Yeah.
You know, like we look at the scripture, and if you don't believe in scripture, or you don't believe in God, you might look at scripture and be like, oh, it's just a bunch of fairy tales, like Snow White. Nah, like these are human beings that actually lived, and if they didn't, we would know because they wouldn't have written it down, and it wouldn't have lasted the first century. We wouldn't even got out of the first century.
Right.
So the reality of, think about, it's a Tuesday. I don't know if it was an actual Tuesday. Okay, yeah. I wasn't there. It's like just a normal Tuesday, and Mary's chilling, doing whatever Mary did on a Tuesday, and an angel appears and then gives and I wanted to humanize the story and like really bring people into Mary, teenage girl, maybe early 20s. I mean, this when you're in that culture, I mean, you're not getting married at 30 like we're all getting married. You're getting married young.
Yeah.
And you're being it's a family union, right? Your dad, if you're the daughter, is communicating with another dad, and y'all come together, and it just so happens that Mary and Joseph are like, yeah, okay, I'm into this. This is great. So bringing people into the story, the human reaction, I thought there were two. The first is, how's this going to work?
Right.
Because I'm a virgin.
Right.
This is interesting. The second
is an understandable question,
which is a great question. Yeah. And it's a human question. It's like, whoa, hold on. I get the plan. I hear you, but like, what do you mean? And then the second is, hold on. If this is true, I do want to see if it's true.
Yeah.
It's like if someone was, hey, did you know that someone is flying outside? Like they're flying. Like, would you not want to go see?
Right.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, let me verify the story. And I think that when we do that, I think the verifying is actually part of what makes the story great, is everybody would do that.
Yeah, I'm guessing there was like some mix inside of Mary at the time, right? It's like, oh my gosh, this angel just told me this. I got to go see Elizabeth because apparently she might be pregnant. And then there's that going on, and then there's also this, if she's pregnant, then I know I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
Kind of.
And what we don't know is the actual true relationship with Mary and Elizabeth besides relatives. Like that could have been just her best friend too.
Right.
So there could have also been this, well, if this is true, which if you don't see your best friend in 6 months, maybe you're not best friends. But if this is true, I want to celebrate with you the fact that you are pregnant, because remember, you couldn't get. Like you were not able to, and now you can. I want to see.
Yeah.
And then there's this extra layer of what that means for Mary. If Elizabeth is, it's a celebration in and of itself for Elizabeth. And then Mary's like, whoa, this means something for me too.
Totally. Well, and here's what's interesting about that. I think when the Lord brings interruptions into our life, it's normal for our immediate reaction to be on the human level, like you were talking about that, right? Because those are the lenses that we see with, and that we
feel with,
react with, and everything else. Like one of the things that I wrote down that I wanted to ask you is, well, what do you do when you sense an interruption might be coming, but you aren't ready or you don't really want it? And here's my story to back this up. Maybe I'm going to ask you to give me some counsel here.
Okay.
So before I came to Hopevale, I was working at a church down in Dallas. And there was a point in time where I was kind of sensing that I needed to be done. Mm-hmm. That it was time for me to move on from the church. And I didn't want to. We love living in Dallas. Bobby had this great network of friends in a growing real estate business, and there were a lot of reasons for us to want to stay there. Family was there. We had 15 years in, kind of a deal. But I couldn't shake this feeling that it was probably going to be time for me to move on. And so kind of reluctantly, I put some things in motion to kind of start that conversation. And then it was like the Lord stepped in and said, okay, that's nice that you're open to what I'm about to do, but he hit the gas pedal and kind of accelerated the process for us. And made it really clear, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it was time to move on. And like I said, there was a lot of human or earthly reasons for us to not want to leave where we were. I can look back now in hindsight and go, okay, God had Hopevale on the mind for us, right?
Yeah.
And this is what he was going to do, was bring us up here. But what do you do when you sense that an interruption might be coming, like that first time you get the Spirit's voice in the back of your head saying something, and you're not ready or you're not sure, so you're kind of in that mode of putting it off? What advice would you have for people who might find themselves in that position?
Yeah, that I think the trust the process is always comes to my mind. Like, especially in that early stages of, like, we've all seen the person who stayed too long. We've all seen the person, the window's closing and they got a shot, and then they end up going an extra 3 years and burning out, and it brings more drama, more hurt, more heartache, more frustration. Like, we've seen that happen. I also realize too, I am a very proactive. I like to
jump then look, maybe.
I don't like to react. I like to be proactive. And when I start getting those feelings, because I've moved around, I've had churches move and, shifts and happen. And even the Hopevale thing, you guys, when we knew what was happening and there was a position, I mean, Sam called me and said, "Hey, got this thing." And I'm like, "Whoa, hold on." And there were some stirrings happening in the church I was at, and it's never it's not the church's fault.
Right.
It was a me thing. And I think when we process that, sometimes God asks you to step down from something good so you can have something great.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't process like that, even though we should. We feel the interruptions and we feel the heartache of the loss. But one of my points was, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know the gain on the other side.
Right.
And so when I'm in those positions personally, that process of, man, I should trust the process a little bit. I start talking to my spouse immediately. Don't keep it quiet. I'm like, hey, the rumblings are rumbling. Heads up.
Yeah.
And typically I'll bring in a few trusted friends to really start the conversation of, hey, here's where I'm at. What do you think? Can you pray for me on this? And I think when you do that process, I think clarity comes faster. And as you're saying, God speeds up the gas pedal. I think because a lot of times God actually gives you some warning signs before the interruption's coming.
Yeah, I think he does. And what you just said is really key. You said we had some good friends walking with us through the process, and you mentioned that yesterday. I wonder if one of the ways that we can be more ready to lean in to whatever it is that the Lord might be doing or leading us toward, the invitation that might feel like an interruption but is actually an invitation. One of the ways we process that or become more ready is to work it through with trusted friends who can remind us that we can trust Jesus.
Take that to Mary and Elizabeth. What does Elizabeth do first thing? Oh, man, do you know what's about to happen to you?
Yeah.
This immediate encouragement and affirmation that it may be scary, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's immediate. That's what happens in Scripture is Mary heads to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth immediately it's not even about Elizabeth's baby. Like, yeah, my baby left, but do you know what you're doing? Because this is going to be crazy awesome. And Mary's so encouraging. And I think that's something that a lot of times, I don't want to pick on technology because I love it, but a lot of times I think that we miss. That's the beauty of coming together as a body of believers, that community aspect. And what I get bummed about in the church and what grieves my heart is people come in and they leave and they don't talk. Or they come in, they check the box on the sermon, great sermon, okay, I'm learning, I'm growing with my relationship with God. But isn't it true that God gave us relationships that help us see different perspective?
Yeah.
And I think the new perspective piece, I mean, that's trusted friends who can help you see your blind spots.
Yeah.
And people out here, you might be listening to this, I got blind spots. That's your blind spot. You do have blind spots.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal.
Well, in the willingness to invest the time, as you were talking, I started thinking about one of my lifelong friends from Chicago, still lives in Chicago, and just recently retired. He put in a lot of years as a school teacher and then a principal, and it was time for him to retire. And it was a big interruption for him. Retirement didn't go well by him. He really struggled with.
He's a worker.
Yeah, and he missed all the relationships and everything else, and he, he'd call me and tell me about how all of his friends are like, okay, really, you want me to feel bad for you because you get to retire, like get over yourself, kind of thing. But he called me one day. This was last summer, and he said, my wife has given me permission to come see you because we need to talk. I need to talk. And he's like, she didn't just give me permission. She told me to get in the car and go for a drive. So he drives over from Chicago.
Yeah.
And then we actually, I cleared my schedule for a couple days, and we actually went up to Mackinac. And we ended up walking around the island. Yeah. Spent a day on the island and just walked. And I don't think I said 2 words.
Wow.
The whole time. He just talked and talked and talked and talked. And by the end of that conversation, he had worked through some of the grieving that he was going through with this change or this interruption that I'm not sure he was completely ready to view it as an invitation, but it was a process for him. And I felt kind of honored that he would say, hey, man, can you carve out some time for me? Because we need to talk. And so I think it's super important to do that when you're the one who's facing the interruption, and when you sense that somebody that you know and love is doing that, make yourself available for the discussion as well.
Yeah, that's big, man. Community is such a big thing, and now more than ever. Yeah. Community is so important, and it doesn't have to be go hang out with hundreds of people, because personality matters. Yeah. I'm not out to the introvert. Listen, I love you. I'm for you, but I want you to know the beauty and the grace, the day-to-day grace that you receive when you have close people in your life. And it takes time, it takes energy, it takes effort. It's not just going to happen. You're not just going to show up, run into each other, and, oh, we're besties. It's going to take time, but there is something beautiful about that. To be able to call you, say, hey, I need some of your time, and for you to do it, because it's like, hey, if you need it, we're in, so let's do it. And that's a big deal.
Yeah, well, and I guess, the Jesus is in the details, right? Like, I could have viewed that as an interruption. Yeah. I got stuff to do. Can we just FaceTime? Right. Or whatever. But it didn't work that way. So
was it Bob Goff's book, Love Does? You ever read this one? I think it's Bob Goff. Yeah. And his book is about that. It's about stepping in with people and loving people where they're at and letting them process. And I think for us, I got to tell you, I would say the reason we're where we're at is because this happened on a Saturday, and on Sunday, 2 of our dear friends got a sitter for their kids, and they sat with us for 20 hours, it felt. I mean, they sat with us. Yeah. And they just sat and didn't have answers, didn't want to try. They just came and they sat with us. And this is a pastor, a buddy of mine, is one of my best friends, and so it's hard. It's also weird going through something like that as a pastor, because you've sat in the room before. You've sat in the room before. Mm-hmm. I've sat in the room before. I know the stuff in here, but I think it's when David laments, like, why are you downcast, my soul, in Psalm? And he's like, put your trust in God. Like, why aren't you buying into this? And I think that's the human perspective that we get, and you have other people continue to remind you and point you back to, we don't know why, but we do know better.
Well, and we can trust, like your third point, trust the pilot, right? Yeah. We can trust that Jesus knows better than I do, that he has a much bigger picture in mind than I do, that his timeline is probably better than mine. Yeah. Often I want to be the one pushing the gas pedal, and I've had to learn over the years to trust Jesus in his timing and everything else. What if the interruption or the thing that you see the Lord doing or sense the Lord doing in your life just feels more like an inconvenience?
Yeah. That's a good question too. I think it is the perspective shift to see it as an invitation. I do think a lot of times we see it as inconvenience, and we don't realize that God is doing his thing. We're talking vintage and time, a season of someone's best work. Yeah. It typically starts with an interruption, And what if God is doing his best work in you during that season? You're inconvenienced, but you're missing the point.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, I don't know any interruptions that aren't inconvenient. Like, an interruption is never planned. Hey, heads
up. By definition.
Right. Like, hey, heads up, Paul. In 2 months, you're going to go through this. Prepare yourself. Like, it's just, it's like, that's the point of the interruption. By definition, you're dead on.
Yeah.
And so I think it's always inconvenient. And I think that's part of being honest. Boy, this is really a bummer. And this is not the greatest time. Yeah. But at the same time, I think context and circumstances matter. And I think sometimes you choose your inconvenience or you choose your interruption. And I stand by people who do that. You believe if you've got conviction or, there's something in you. It's like, man, I got to do this. I get that.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. So another layer to, like Paul on the couch this morning, right? Or this is my therapy session. I'm just going to turn this Deeper Dive podcast
do my best.
into my therapy session. We moved from Texas up to Saginaw. And about a year after we moved here, we're still, I tell people, it's been an acquired taste and yada, yada, and all that. Bobby's mom starts getting sick, and she's struggling with cancer now. Yeah. And she's going through chemo and the whole deal. And now we live 2 hours away because they live over in West Michigan. And that's where Bobby grew up.
Yep.
And I remember at first when Bobby would say, hey, I got to go. I'm going to go over to my folks. Is this okay? I'm going to go over there for 4 or 5 days just to be with my mom.
Yeah.
Right. And she, over the last year, has been gone quite a bit, which has been inconvenient for me and a bit of a challenge. And I cannot, in all honesty say that I've always had a great attitude about that, right? But then Bobby comes home after a visit. I want to say this was like 6 months ago. And she was supposed to come home on a Friday, and she calls and says, I'm not going to be able to come home till Saturday. And then she gets home, and I was like, well, what's going on? She says, my mom started walking me through the house and showing me everything and telling me the story behind like every piece of furniture.
Wow.
And every picture on the wall. And she's like, I just had this sense that I needed to lean in to that conversation with my mom. And then it ended up being for hours.
Wow.
Where her mom just walked her around.
I've been in this house, and they have a lot of really cool stories.
Yes.
And there are really cool things, pictures on the wall. So I can imagine hours. I mean, I can imagine that.
Yeah. So Bobby looks at me and she goes, I don't think I've ever had a conversation like that with my mom.
Wow.
Right. And then she says, I think I'm figuring out why we were supposed to move to Michigan.
Wow.
Again. Right. So I love my wife. And she, like me, tends to, want to accelerate God's timing on things and wants to know why immediately.
Yeah.
But that was a really rich moment for her, for us as a couple.
Yeah.
Talk about an interruption turning into an invitation. And it's still ongoing, right? Like her mom is still dealing with cancer and still going through treatment and everything else. And it's still inconvenient for us. Bobby's gone a lot these days. But on my good days, right, when I'm living in the Spirit, I can see the opportunity or the invitation that's there, that the interruption is creating. And I think it's more than just being an optimist and like having a positive outlook. I think it's actually having an awareness of the fact that God's agenda, God always knows. It's not like he sits in heaven and goes, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was coming. How am I going to help Paul and Bobby work through this thing?
You're right.
Whatever. So there's that, right? Do you have any advice or any thoughts on how we can improve our ability to see circumstances with his eyes?
Yeah, man. It's so hard because I think maybe it's a good thing. I don't know I think it's my natural bent to try to see his perspective. That's actually my first try. I'll tell you, I'll take you to Saturday in the hospital, and we allowed ourselves to feel every feeling we were feeling.
Yeah.
So in the hospital room, it was completely human. And even more, coming home, we got home at midnight that night. Our two boys are up early, and we're just drained. And I get up with the boys, and I have a moment where both boys just came up and gave me a hug. And I just, feel it. And I think in those moments, I think that's why it's so incredibly important to allow yourself to be human. And then my natural, by Monday, I woke up and I said, we're playing worship music in this house all day. Because we're going to announce to powers and principalities that we will not be moved even when it hurts. And there were two or three songs that came up on that playlist. Dan and I are like, we can't do this one, but the reality of trying to see God's perspective and trusting that the plan is better. And that was that's a big point, is how do you see God's perspective? And sometimes you won't until later.
Right.
Like, your scenario you're talking about, it's been 3 years now, 4 years almost.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point, is like sometimes it's hindsight and time, and you don't want to rush those.
Yeah.
Because there's so much good that can happen in the middle there. Thinking about if Dana and I rushed to the end of the story, we would miss years of our oldest kids' stories. And so there's this level of multiple facet dynamics that we have to sit in this moment and trust that God has got it and that it will make sense at some point.
Right.
And at the same time, try not to race there, because our boys need mom and dad too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's the discipline of, in those moments, praying the prayer, saying, okay, Jesus, help me see what you're doing here, because I know you love me perfectly, and I know you have a plan in all of this, and I trust you, and I trust your plan, but I don't see it.
Yeah. And I think you have to give yourself grace.
Yeah.
Grace is not something you put in a box in your locker and you just come to it when you need it. Grace is an everyday life spring of great. Like, it's an everyday, man, I need this every day. And I need to give myself grace to grieve, and I need to give myself grace to be mad, or I need to give myself grace to sit. But just because you're grieving or mourning or mad or frustrated does not mean that you don't trust.
Right.
And I think we got to be careful not to say like, oh yeah, whatever. And that's why my plan, and that's like, trusting the plan does not mean, God's plan is always better. It does not equal easier, and it does not equal painless.
And it may not equal familiar.
Right. And it's just, and that's the that's the truth. And I wanted to make sure that people knew that just because trusting in God's plan is one of the stages of grief is acceptance, and being okay. You're okay with what happened, which doesn't mean that you're okay with what happened.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? And that's like psychological. This is one of the stages of grief. It's okay to be okay with what happened, but that doesn't mean you're okay with what happened.
Yeah.
And I think people miss that.
Yeah. And the process, you have to honor the process. Like, I texted you on Thanksgiving morning.
You did.
And I just said, hey, thankful for you. And your reply really caught me off guard a little bit. Your reply was, we woke up to a harder day than normal.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still thanking God.
Yeah.
Right. So you're living what you're saying. You are definitely living what you're saying. But let's climb back into Mary's shoes, right? So Mary's.
Yeah, let's talk about her.
She's finding out.
Done with me?
Yeah. She's finding out that she's pregnant.
Yep. Big cultural things.
It is not how she was already engaged, right? So she was probably thinking about, I'm going to be a mom someday.
At some point.
And this is going to be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So different, I don't know if that's grief or it's like shock and awe. What is going on in my life, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know that it's always, interruptions aren't always tragedy or whatever. They can sometimes just be change.
Yeah.
It was unexpected that we didn't see it coming. Any advice or any words on how to, I sound like a broken record. Maybe it's trust the plan, trust the process, trust the pilot, right?
Nothing wrong with that. There is a reality too. One of the things that I immediately jump into that I did not talk about on stage is that think about that conversation she's got to have with Joseph.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, I'm pregnant. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I have a story. And it would sound crazy. And actually, if you read scripture, there's this moment where an angel of the Lord appears to Joseph.
He's like,
and I don't actually know if we're going to be talking about that in the series, but I do know that this angel's like, whoa, hey buddy, you gotta know some stuff.
She's not lying.
She's not lying. It's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
Which impacts the way Joseph reacts to this. But there is this level of, at some point, Mary's got to tell him.
Right.
You can't hide it forever. You got to talk about it. And that conversation to me, I wonder how many times she practiced that.
Yeah.
She's out in the field by yourself, just trying to get the words right or trying to figure it out. What was it that he said? He said the Holy Spirit is going to do this.
How am I going to tell my fiance this?
How do I tell my fiance, soon to be, not yet married husband that I'm pregnant and it's nobody's child, it's God's child? How do I do that? I'm gonna sound crazy.
Yeah.
And then what does she do when she's processing? Like what were those moments like? We don't get to see that. What an inconvenience. Who wants to have that convo ever? That doesn't sound fun at all. And yet,
right.
We see that when she trusts the plan, and maybe she didn't. Maybe she was just superhuman, super Christian, like she was just like, she is the mother of Jesus, but maybe she's like, no, I gotta figure it out. But I have a feeling that there was probably some human tendencies in there.
I'm sure it was this crazy mixed bag of, could this be?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
This is real.
This would be unbelievable. An angel came and told me.
And you're even waiting.
Yeah.
You're even waiting months before you start seeing or feeling. I mean,
yeah.
Okay, cool. But did she have morning sickness? How'd she feel? Did she pop early? Did she pop, like all of these things that you just like, if you've never gone through this with someone, then you don't know these things. I didn't know these until we had kids, and you see these things happening. I mean, all of those changes that are going to happen. Oh, and by the way, you got to plan a wedding. There's a whole thing happening, and people are going to be talking about this.
Yeah.
Oh, no wonder they got married. Look.
Now we know why. Yeah.
Now we know. Oh, it must be no, it's not ours. Oh, drama and all those things, and what was that like? The human piece of that interruption.
Right.
And I think we skip by that. And I don't want us to be so familiar with a story that is beautiful and really good that we just shoot by it. And we do that. We've heard the story. It's Christmas time. I got to go get some lunch and I got to go do some grocery shopping. I got to get some presents under the tree. But don't miss the reality of the story. And I think that's why, given our circumstances and given all of the conversation that we've been having about our lives, and when we read Mary, and when we were talking about, Dan was like, "Hey, you sure you want to go for it?" I felt like I have to.
Yeah.
I felt like I can speak on this intimately. I feel like I know this more than I've ever known it.
Yeah. Well, I think on behalf of the church, I just want to say thanks for that, for saying yes to the message yesterday. I'm super glad that we took the first week of our Vintage Christmas series to look at this story, this part of the story, and not gloss over it like you talked about in your message. Yesterday was, I think, the beginning of Advent, right? And so Mary's journey was loaded with inconvenience and innuendo and all the things that we were talking about. But that was the journey that she got to walk, and Joseph got to walk with her, right? I was up in Bay City yesterday, and at the end of the service, I got up in front of the group and I just said, okay, let's all remember that the Lord is with us.
Yeah.
The Lord's with you. So I guess my parting shot, or the last thing I'd love for you to talk about is, as we head into Advent, as we kind of lean into this season, and life can get nutty and busy and chaotic and all the things that come with Christmas, right? What word do you have for us as we're all leaning into Advent to help us not miss the interruptions that Jesus might have planned for us? Because sometimes they're small, right? Sometimes they're not always these big, huge, life-altering things. Maybe they're just moments that the Lord has planned. What would be kind of your pastoral word to wrap this conversation for us as we head into the rest of the series and look forward to Christmas?
Yeah, I think the word that comes to mind, or the words, is just slow down. The hustle and bustle of Christmas is a thing, and one of my favorite Christmas films is The Grinch, and so you see all the craziness and 99%, it's crazy, but slowing down. I think one thing that this scenario in Mary, and man, I don't want to read ahead for people, but Mary, oftentimes throughout the story of Jesus growing up, the few things we get, it says, now Mary treasured all these things up in her heart.
Yeah.
And Mary slows down and just sees it all and experiences it all. And one of the things in our scenario, which is tragic, is life, nothing is guaranteed. That's just true. It's not fun. It's not great. It's true. We all have at most one breath in our lungs at a time. And how are you going to spend that? How are you going to take the time to spend that? Are you going to be mad at the car in front of you for cutting you off and grabbing your parking spot? Or are you going to spend it trying to pour into moments that are special? And are you going to allow yourself to feel the feelings? Are you going to allow yourself to sit in the moments and just slow down enough to enjoy the little things? Which, right now for me is my kid coming up and just looking at me and saying, "Hey, Daddy, It's just, I want to sit in that."
Do you have any super practical things? Like, okay, for me, I get an Advent Devo that I do every year. Mm-hmm. It's in my inbox every morning, and it's not like a, hey, read this verse and here's your prayer thought.
Yeah, yours is pretty intense. I did it one year with you, and I was like, "Ooh, yeah, this is it."
It takes a little bit of time, right? So the discipline for me of carving out 15, 20 minutes every morning from now until Christmas throughout Advent, it helps me live in a posture of like having my antenna up for what it is that the Spirit might be up to, or what interruptions he might have planned for me that I could otherwise just blow past, even if it's just that moment. The other thing that's maybe a little less spiritual sounding for me is the Charlie Brown Christmas video.
Yeah.
That's a deal for me. But I don't watch it with my family every year. I watch it by myself.
Yeah.
Bobby asked me once, she's like, "Why do you do that?" And I'm like, "It's just my thing." Yeah. I'll watch it again with the whole family, but going to watch it by myself because it's 24 minutes. And when Linus gets up at the end to answer Charlie Brown's question, what is Christmas all about? That is a thing that puts me in a right frame of mind to be ready for the interruptions that the Spirit might have for me.
Yeah.
So what is it for you? I've just kind of dropped some of my stuff, but what is it for you?
If we're talking movies, which we can do all day, I love A Christmas Carol. That one for me is super important. If you have the chance to look at your life, if you had the chance to look at the whole story of your life and really see every interruption that happened and what happened after, we would never doubt God's plan.
Yes, true.
Our perspective would change. This Christmas, I know for Dana and myself, we're committed to waking up earlier. And we're not talking 3 hours earlier. We're talking 30 minutes earlier.
Yeah. We're
going to sacrifice some sleep to sit at our Christmas tree and enjoy each other's presence.
Yeah.
That's good. For us, that's a practical, you can do it, because ultimately is that 30 minutes of sleep when you're, twirling around and you're uncomfortable and you can't get back to bed, is it really worth your time, or is there something more valuable you can do? We talked a little bit about 2 a.m. and the inconvenience of 2 a.m. I read one time and changed my perspective is the body gets what the body needs. And so there have been many times in my world where I've been up at 2 a.m. reading my Bible because the house is just quiet. Yeah. And how many times do you get that? Yeah. Just a quiet house and an invitation to presence with God. And my encouragement to anybody out there is up at 2 a.m. Get out of bed, put on a blanket, open your book, open your Bible, and receive the invitation.
Because it might not just be an interruption of your sleep.
It might just be an invitation.
It might just be an invitation. That's really, really good. Well, man, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I'm going to watch A Christmas Carol, and I'm going to watch it through that set of lenses. And when I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm going to commit to you and to everyone listening to this podcast that whenever I wake up in the middle of the night between now and Christmas, I can make that commitment that I'm going to not be frustrated by that. I'm going to sit on the end of the bed, or I'm going to go sit in my chair and ask the Lord if there's something that he wants to talk to me about. Yeah. So that's really good. And again, I just want to thank you, Brent, for yesterday. I
appreciate that, man.
Jesus was in it, and he had a lot to say to all of us through you. I'm so glad that we started the series, like I said, by looking at divine interruptions that are really invitations that we don't want to miss. So thanks, and thanks to all of you for listening to this conversation. I invite you to join us again next week. Please try to catch every week of the series, and we'll see you next week in this podcast when we take a deeper dive. Have a good one.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also, make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it is posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family at Hopevale Church.